Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At 7:30 a.m., my wife stormed in, trauma doctor by trade, unshakable by nature, holding her phone like it had betrayed her. "Why is my car pinging a test server in Kansas?" she snapped. That was the moment I realized someone was spying on us using my stolen code. Game on. It was barely 7:30 when my wife, Amber, came back through the front door holding her phone like it had personally insulted her. She's not one to get rattled easily, spends her days as a trauma doctor, and keeps her nerves cooler than liquid nitrogen. But this morning, she looked rattled. "Mark," she said, her voice clipped, "why is my car pinging a test server in Kansas?" I blinked once, trying to catch up. Kansas. GeoVigil backend. It's showing in the app logs. It started 2 days ago. I thought it was a bug until I looked closer this morning. I took the phone from her and opened our internal dev console. Sure enough, there it was. An outbound signal totally outside the firmware she was supposed to be running. Her Neo Bolt was reporting telemetry to an unknown endpoint, masked but traceable. I narrowed my eyes. This wasn't a bug. It was a hijack. I marched out to the garage with a diagnostic puck and plugged it into the underport. The car's system booted up beautifully, but the telemetry stream was split, one flowing through our encrypted API, the other through a shadow route, bouncing through a masked IP address. Amber had followed me out. Also, there's something stuck in the rear quarter panel, like a sticker or maybe a patch. No branding, she pointed, and I crouched down to take a look. Sure enough, in the seam just above the wheel well, there was a flat gray tag. One of those knockoff adhesive trackers, cheap, no visible serial number, and a QR code that resolved to an IP address. I scanned it, and that's when I froze. The IP range. Local, and not just any local. It traced back to a domain leased to the Briarwood Glades HOA. A slow-burning fury started rising in my chest. I knew those bastards had it out for me ever since I bought this property just outside their neighborhood's jurisdiction. I'd made it explicitly clear I wasn't interested in being part of their little suburban dictatorship. No dues, no control, no interference. But Karen Lee Hargreaves, the president of Briarwood Glades, had a different idea. She'd sent letters, complaints about Amber's noisy electric vehicle, cited unauthorized night departures, and once claimed our exterior lights violated community brightness standards. We lived 10 acres and a fence away. She might as well have complained the moon was too loud. I pulled the puck data into my laptop and decrypted the signal. Whoever embedded this tracker was feeding our location to a proxy server disguised as a utility monitor. Very cute. I leaned back and stared at the screen. The device ID didn't match any of ours. Worse, its signature was close. Too close. Like, intimate. I cracked open the archive logs from our older firmware vault. There it was. A dead match to a proprietary telemetry firmware I had coded myself in 2017, back before we tightened access with quantum lock signatures. I'd never published that code. I hadn't even touched it in years. But there it was, out in the wild, running on a cheap off-brand GPS board and spitting my wife's movements to a hostile server less than 2 miles away. I looked up at Amber, who was still standing silently, arms crossed, waiting for me to explain. "You've been tracked," I said, "by someone using stolen GeoVigil code." Her expression didn't even flinch. "That explains a lot." I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to stay level. This wasn't just overreach. This was illegal surveillance. Intellectual property theft, possibly even stalking. And unfortunately for Karen, I knew every line of code her fake device was running. Now it was my turn to watch her movements. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying it in my head. The unbranded sticker, the hijacked data stream, the counterfeit firmware with my own damn name buried in the code. It felt like someone had broken into my house, not to steal, but to sit in the corner and take notes while my wife drank her morning coffee. By sunrise, I had my plan. If Karen wanted data, I'd give her all the data she could choke on. First, I recompiled the firmware on Amber's legitimate GeoVigil Edge unit. I modified the back-end hooks to detect when any foreign device tried to echo or intercept telemetry packets from her car. When it did, the module would silently trigger a decoy protocol. I called it Rabbit Hole. Rabbit Hole worked like this. Instead of feeding her actual location, it would start generating a fake but believable path based on historic traffic data. Gas stations, shopping centers, park trailheads. Nothing dramatic, Just enough to suggest something suspicious, something that, say, a petty suburban surveillance queen might interpret as evidence. Then I set the car to ping a custom server every 30 seconds. From there, I could monitor everything in real time. Every sniff, every packet, every IP address that even blinked in our direction. And, of course, Rabbit Hole would make sure Karen thought she'd hit pay dirt. Amber was hesitant at first. "You're really going to let them think I'm sneaking off to meet someone?" I grinned. "If we do this right, Karen's going to think she's cracked the Da Vinci Code. Let's make it cinematic." That afternoon, I had Amber leave the Neobolt parked at the edge of our property line, just in view from the shared easement road. I made sure the tracker was still active and that our little GPS parasite was faithfully transmitting the decoy path to the server. The bait was live. I monitored the stream for hours. At first, nothing unusual, just the usual pings from the same masked server Karen had been using. But around 7:30 that evening, something new popped up. A browser session from an IP registered to briarwoodglades.org accessed the tracking feed directly, then started checking the decoy logs every 3 minutes. Not scraping, watching. I set up a shadow monitor using a second laptop and enabled the internal dash cam of the car, just to be safe. It was dark when the real fun started. A silver Mercedes SUV, HOA plates and all, pulled up about 30 yards from our fence line. I watched it through the camera's night vision lens. Karen stepped out with a laptop under her arm, stood by the fence, and pointed it at Amber's car like she was divining ley lines. She checked the screen, smiled to herself, and made a phone call. I listened in through the open mic I'd left on the dash. "She's out there again," Karen said, breathless. "She's back at the same spot. I knew it. No way she's just working late. You see the pattern? She's meeting someone." The glee in her voice was revolting. She sounded like she was about to win an Oscar for Best Supporting Neighborhood Sociopath. I muted the audio and leaned back, letting it all sink in. She really believed it. She thought she'd caught Amber cheating. She had no idea she was staring at a simulation, no idea that every dot on her map had been carefully planted by the man whose code she'd stolen. I sat there in the dark with a glass of scotch in my hand, watching Karen pace like a hunter who just tracked her prey to the watering hole. I couldn't help it. I laughed. And then I started planning the next phase. The forest preserve was the perfect place for an illusion. Roughly 40 miles out, thick with pine and old gravel service roads, it had just enough cell coverage to support what I needed. A stage. If Karen wanted a scandal, I'd give her a full-blown melodrama, complete with props, lights, and a convincing lead actor who wouldn't argue about his lines. By mid-morning, I loaded the Neobolt onto a flatbed and drove it out myself, along with a duffel bag of gear that would make a low-budget film crew proud. My main character? A CPR mannequin we'd kept in our emergency training kit, complete with weighted limbs and a silicone head that, from 20 feet, passed for human. I dressed him in a hoodie and slumped him behind the wheel. With the car parked at a dead-end path just beyond a fire lane gate, I positioned it like it had limped there and died. Flashers on, hood half open, mannequin in the driver's seat, head tilted awkwardly like someone had passed out, or worse. I added one more touch, a hidden cam under the dash, triggered by motion near the driver's side. I wanted to capture every twitch of shock on Karen's face, and I knew she'd come. By now, the GPS decoy data had painted a perfect story. A vehicle stopping at this same spot 3 nights in a row for an hour or more, late at night. According to Karen's feverish HOA brain, this place was either a meth lab or a makeout point. And both in her eyes were grounds for moral crusade. Around 4 p.m., I sent a tip to my friend in the Texas Cybercrimes Unit, Lieutenant Baird Brooks. He owed me more than a few favors. Once upon a time, we debugged GPS spoofing schemes and cartel border smuggling ops. When I told him what I'd found, he didn't even hesitate. "You sure this isn't just HOA paranoia?" he asked. I sent him the IP logs, the firmware signature, and the chat dump I'd sniffed from Karen's last attempt to access the stolen firmware remotely. Baird whistled. "Yeah, that's a whole buffet of illegal. All right, I'll bring body cams and backup." We waited, cloaked in a side path, engine off. At precisely 6:23, headlights appeared through the trees. A black Range Rover crawled up the gravel. The vanity plate read BGHOA1. I could have guessed with my eyes closed. Karen stepped out, flanked by 2 others, a wiry man in a golf pullover and a younger woman with a clipboard. All 3 moved like they were about to serve eviction papers to a ghost. Karen beamed at the parked Neobolt like she was about to win a Pulitzer. She held up her iPad and spoke into the wind. She's here. See, parked, engine's cold. She's inside, hiding. Got the timestamp. Got everything. She crept closer to the car. Her iPad camera panned slowly, deliberately. The other two hung back, clearly uncomfortable. The man whispered, "Are you sure we should be doing this?" Karen didn't answer. She pressed her face against the glass, trying to peer into the driver's seat. And that's when the dash cam flashed to life, recording as I stepped into the open. "Smile," I said. "You're on Candid Conspiracy." Karen spun so fast she nearly tripped on her wedge boots. Behind me, Baird emerged from the trees, flanked by two plainclothes cybercrime officers with active body cams and a warrant folder. "Karen Lee Hargreaves," Baird announced, flipping open his badge. "Step away from the vehicle." She stammered something about community standards and monitoring unusual activity, but Baird wasn't buying it. "We have reason to believe you've engaged in unauthorized electronic surveillance using counterfeit devices loaded with proprietary firmware. That's wiretapping under federal law. Also, breaking and entering if you placed anything on private property, and that doesn't even cover the fact that you're here uninvited, with a tablet full of other people's locations." Karen tried to bolt. I didn't even flinch. One of the officers casually intercepted her as she reached her car. She went down yelling, "This is harassment!" I was protecting the community. In her bag, we found the smoking gun, a custom build of my stolen firmware running a GUI designed for live tracking, complete with tags like Housewife 2, Runner 3, and Mark's Wife. But it didn't stop there. In the trunk of her car was a plastic organizer bin, neatly labeled, zip-locked packages of 5 more GPS stickers, pre-coded and ready to deploy. One read, "For Doctor Neely, Loud Dog Lady." Another, "Lot 27, always parks crooked." It was a goddamn surveillance starter kit. Back at my place that night, my home office looked more like a forensic lab than a tech executive's den. Multiple laptops were open, logs scrolling, data pulling from cached device memory. Every second of Karen's digital footprint was being preserved, duplicated, backed up to secure drives. Baird and his team had done a quick surface scrape on scene, but the real meat was inside that stolen firmware. And unfortunately for Karen, every copy of my code, even the one she thought she'd borrowed, was seeded with digital watermarking and audit tags. Hidden CRC checks, metadata stamps, even a line of hexadecimal that spelled out my name like a signature hidden in oil paint. That meant 2 things. First, the code was undeniably mine. And second, any attempt to use or deploy it without a license was not just copyright infringement. It was theft of protected intellectual property under federal law. It didn't take long to identify where the breach had happened. Her build of the firmware was based on version 3.0.7, an experimental branch we'd archived and locked down 5 years ago. At the time, only 3 employees had access. One of them left in 2022, and according to some leaked PayPal transactions in Karen's digital folder, had been paid roughly $800 for a firmware consulting project. The messages between them were infuriating. "Can you break this hash?" she'd written. "We just want to see where PPL are going. Nothing crazy." Nothing crazy, just illegally stalking half your neighborhood. I forwarded everything to our legal team, who practically started salivating. My general counsel, Ruth, called me before lunch. "We've got her nailed. Copyright violation, trafficking in stolen code, corporate espionage, and let's not forget Section 18 U.S.C. 2511. You know, wiretap laws. This is federal." "She's going to try the community protection defense," I said, claim she did it for the good of the neighborhood. "She also logged 15 unique users in her tracker interface," Ruth replied. "She sold the data mark. There's a CSV file in that tablet labeled insurance leads." That stopped me. "She sold it?" "Yup. Looks like she had a side deal going with an actuarial firm, tracking driving behavior, late-night movements, even pediatric travel data. The file includes a column labeled Minors in Vehicle, pulled from license plate database cross-checks." I stared at the phone. Jesus. She's not just paranoid, she's profitable. That afternoon, federal agents conducted a formal search of the HOA's community office. Behind a locked cabinet, they found backups of Karen's spy data on a local NAS unit. The files were extensive. Raw GPS traces, daily movement summaries, notes on individuals, and even flagged behavior tags like routine deviation and suspicious route change. They had names, times, family patterns. This wasn't surveillance. It was profiling. Publicly, the HOA tried to distance itself from her. The vice president released a statement calling her actions unauthorized and personally motivated. But we both knew the truth. At least 2 board members had logged into her system. One of them even requested data on his neighbor's teenage daughter. Baird called me again that evening. We're looking at more than just wiretapping, possibly conspiracy to commit digital stalking, IP theft, and data monetization without disclosure. She's in deep. How deep? She's going to need a damn submarine. I pulled Amber into my office and showed her the report. She stared at the screen for a long time, then simply said, "I want them held accountable. Every last one of them." I nodded. "Oh, they will be." The courtroom was packed like a tech convention with free coffee. It was the preliminary hearing, just a taste of what was to come, but even that felt like an event. The gallery overflowed with reporters, angry homeowners, 2 HOA board members who tried to act invisible, and at least one guy in a "Don't Tread on Me" shirt who definitely didn't live in the neighborhood. The buzz was thick and electric. Karen sat at the defendant's table in a muted gray suit. All of her usual smugness evaporated into tight lips and clenched jaw. No HOA badge, no clipboard, no superiority complex visible. Just a 50-something woman finally realizing that "I'm the president of the community" wasn't going to save her now. The prosecution started with the technical evidence. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp former cybersecurity litigator named Nadine Chu, walked through the chain of custody like it was a TED Talk from hell. She presented the counterfeit trackers, the stolen firmware signatures, and then, with a flourish, introduced the exact code hashes burned into each chip. "Your Honor," she said, holding up a printed page, "these lines of code, this string of numbers, is Mr. Duran's intellectual fingerprint. And this," she flipped the page, "is where Mrs. Hargreaves and her unnamed accomplices tried to erase it. You can still see his signature embedded right here." She highlighted the phrase, "M. Duran, OG Firmware 370. I almost smiled. Almost. Karen's defense lawyer tried to argue community interest. She was concerned for the safety of the neighborhood. Her actions, while misguided, were driven by vigilance, not malice. Nadine didn't blink. Then why was she charging $75 a head for private access to her tracking dashboard? Why did she label individual vehicles with names like HOA Hostel, Kid Danger, and, my personal favorite, Lot 31, Annoying Prius? The judge, a federal appointee who clearly had no patience for suburban espionage, leaned forward and said, "Counselor, you'll need to find something stronger than vigilance when your client was tracking minor children and exporting their movement data to insurance firms without consent." I could feel Karen shrinking in her seat. But the real hammer came when the prosecution called Baird to testify. He walked the court through the software interface found on Karen's iPad and laid out the user logs, timestamps, device pings, recorded screenshots. He even had a clip where Karen referred to my wife by name. "She's definitely sneaking around. I've got her entire route. She's not so perfect, is she?" The audio played aloud in the courtroom. Karen squirmed like her chair was on fire. Then they presented the financials. PayPal logs showing payments to a former GeoVigil contractor, $2,000 over 6 months. Message history that included gems like, "Can we make it less obvious?" and "If I get caught, you never existed." By the time they were done, the judge looked like he was personally offended by her existence. Given the nature of the offenses, federal wiretapping, theft of intellectual property, illegal surveillance of civilians, including minors, I am inclined to deny bail until trial. Karen's lawyer stood to protest. The judge cut him off. "Your client weaponized technology she didn't understand, violated civil liberties, and monetized it. This isn't Neighborhood Watch. This is digital stalking with a business plan." Bail was denied. Karen's expression was priceless, mouth slightly open, skin pale as printer paper. She looked around like someone had swapped the floor out from under her. No savior in sight. No HOA emergency meeting could vote her out of this one. As marshals cuffed her and led her out, I caught her eye. Not out of gloating, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good, but to show her what justice looked like in human form. She looked away first. Outside the courthouse, 3 families approached me. They'd also found trackers. Their kids had been tagged. They hadn't known who to blame. Until now. "You saved us from something we didn't even know was happening," one of them said. I nodded, jaw tight. "She picked the wrong firmware." The fallout hit faster than I expected. By the end of the week, the Dallas Chronicle ran a headline that read, like the opening line of a dystopian novel, HOA president accused of running covert GPS, spy ring, residents tracked without consent. Within hours, it spread across every local outlet, then bled into national cybersecurity circles. I even got tagged in a Reddit thread titled "When You Try to Outsmart the Guy Who Literally Built the System." But public attention wasn't the only thing detonating. GeoVigil's legal team filed a civil suit in federal court within 72 hours of Karen's bail denial. Theft of proprietary firmware, exploitation of embedded code, reputational damage. But it wasn't just about punishing her. We were also targeting the HOA itself. And as it turned out, they were far from innocent bystanders. Discovery brought out the rot. Emails between Karen and the HOA board discussing digital oversight initiatives, minutes from closed-door meetings where she presented anonymized GPS heat maps under the guise of traffic management. She even claimed a pilot program with a third-party data provider, which, of course, was just her fake dashboard and a bootlegged firmware core. The board president, after Karen, a milquetoast CPA named Ray Olson, testified that he didn't fully understand what Karen was doing, but believed it was a way to make the community safer. You thought collecting movement data from unwitting residents, including children, was safety? Our attorney asked. I assumed it was aggregated, he mumbled. Like Google Maps does it. Karen's insurance company dropped her coverage the moment wiretapping was confirmed. That same week, the Texas Attorney General's office opened a parallel investigation into the HOA itself for complicity, citing a growing body of evidence that other board members had accessed the illegal system, even if only out of curiosity. But the moment that really landed like a hammer came during a deposition from one of the insurance firms Karen had sold data to. It was all there. Digital contracts signed under her name, GPS trace batches uploaded through a masked subdomain, payment logs, even a line item request asking for long-term behavioral profiles for suburban vehicle clusters. Apparently, the firm was experimenting with behavior-based rate adjustments, tracking who stayed home, who drove late, who lived near problem zones. Karen had offered them a suburban petri dish. "This is some Black Mirror stuff," one of our engineers muttered after reviewing the files. By the end of the month, the HOA had lost all public support. A petition to dissolve the entire governing board reached 3,000 signatures, more than half the neighborhood. Sponsors and vendors backed out. Title companies stopped recognizing Briarwood Glades as an HOA with active legal standing, and the municipality initiated proceedings to place the HOA under temporary public oversight. It was imploding from the inside. Meanwhile, our civil suit was building momentum. Ruth, our counsel, compiled a comprehensive damages model. Between the stolen codebase, reputational damage to GeoVigil, attorney costs, and the impact on users whose trust had been violated through our tech, we estimated a loss and restitution figure of just over $1.1 million. I told Ruth to push for full damages. No negotiation, no settlement. I wasn't after money. I was after precedent. Late one night, as I sat outside by the fire pit with Amber, she leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "You know, it's weird. I keep thinking what would have happened if we'd never noticed that little ping. If you hadn't built that system, how far she would have gone." I didn't answer. I just stared into the fire. Because I knew the answer, Karen would have kept going. Quietly, smugly, undetected. Until maybe it wasn't just trackers. Until maybe it wasn't just data. The federal trial began on a Monday morning that felt colder than it should have been for Texas. Even the sun looked hesitant. We weren't in some local courthouse now. This was the real deal. Wood-paneled walls, federal seal, microphones that picked up your soul if you spoke too loud. Karen sat in a tailored suit again, but this time she looked exhausted. Gone was the artificial confidence. No nods to imaginary supporters, no sneering glances, just silence. The prosecution opened hard. Nadine Chu stood like she'd been waiting for this her entire career. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this is not about one woman placing a tracker. This is about a digital ecosystem, illegally constructed, commercially exploited, and aimed at invading the most basic right every American has, privacy." She laid out the full case methodically. Theft of proprietary firmware, deployment of counterfeit devices, monetization of illegally gathered location data. She brought in our code audit trail, Karen's PayPal records, chat logs with the ex-employee, and GPS files that mapped neighborhood children's commutes in horrifying detail. Karen's defense tried to soften it. She's not a hacker. She didn't break into systems. She simply misunderstood the legal boundaries of location sharing, her attorney argued. Her intent was protective. She's a woman with a background in insurance investigations, concerned for community safety. But then came the expert witnesses. Baird took the stand again. He explained how the trackers weren't passive. They actively pinged proprietary GeoVigil cloud services using backdoored firmware. He demonstrated how Karen's iPad interface allowed for real-time tracking, data exports, alerts by user ID, and even behavioral flagging. He showed logs proving that devices had been planted not just on my wife's car, but on delivery trucks, school buses, and residents who had disagreed with HOA policies. Then came my turn. I stepped into the witness box, calm but wired with quiet fury. Nadine walked me through the development of GeoVigil, how the firmware had been closed source, the protective tech we'd used to ensure privacy. Then she asked how I discovered the breach. When my wife noticed her app reporting to a phantom IP address, that was the first red flag. What did you find? That one of my old firmware versions had been ripped, altered, and installed onto unlicensed hardware. Someone was impersonating my system using stolen tools. And the tracking data, it wasn't anonymized. It was personal, targeted. The jury sat still, dead still. And what would the danger be if this behavior continued unchecked? I didn't blink. Eventually, it wouldn't stop at location. It never does. Today, it's GPS. Tomorrow, it's microphones, cameras, biometric data. Once someone crosses the line into surveilling without consent, it only escalates. That line landed like a freight train. When Nadine rested the case, the courtroom buzzed. Karen looked like she'd aged 10 years. Even her lawyer kept glancing down, like the floor might offer a trapdoor escape. Then came the sentencing phase. The judge didn't waste time. He listed her charges one by one. Federal wiretapping under Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 2511, trafficking in stolen software, criminal stalking via electronic means, distribution of non-consensual personal data for profit. And then he looked right at her. You did this in the name of safety, yet your actions endangered dozens of lives. You used stolen technology not just to spy, but to profit from spying. You had a choice at every point. And you chose to violate the very community you claimed to protect. His gavel struck like thunder. I sentence you to 4 years in federal prison. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Karen slumped, finally broken. Her cuffs clicked on with finality. Outside, I spoke briefly to the press. I didn't want this. I built my company to empower people, not to become a cautionary tale. But when someone weaponizes the tools of trust, there has to be accountability. The cameras clicked. The wind felt lighter. That night, my inbox flooded with messages from people across the country. Some from other HOA neighborhoods, some from privacy advocates, others just regular folks saying, "Thank you." Someone finally pushed back. It wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. The dust hadn't even settled from the sentencing when the civil case against the HOA shifted into high gear. Unlike the criminal trial, which was all about justice, this one was about consequence, real money, real accountability. We were suing not just Karen, but the entire HOA entity, Briarwood Glades Association, for willful negligence, complicity in data theft, and violation of digital privacy under state and federal statutes. And thanks to Discovery, we had receipts, literal ones. Emails surfaced between Karen and the treasurer discussing covering hardware costs and licensing vendor APIs that never existed. Meeting minutes revealed budget allocations labeled Community Analytics, a euphemism for Karen's GPS scheme. There was even a PowerPoint she'd presented to the board titled HOA 2.0 Real-Time Oversight. We submitted all of it. The HOA's lawyers tried to pin everything on Karen personally. She acted alone, they insisted. The board had no operational knowledge of the specifics. But that didn't hold up, because when subpoenaed login logs from the tracking dashboard came in, they showed board members accessing the platform regularly, sometimes more than Karen herself. One board member even tagged routes with labels like "bad dog owners" and "suspected Airbnb." We weren't just dealing with apathy. This was coordinated. I sat across the courtroom, watching them crumble. Ray Olson, the acting president, looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He avoided my gaze like I was a ghost. The HOA lawyer, a young associate, probably too new to realize the ship was sinking, made the mistake of suggesting the damages were hypothetical. Our attorney, Ruth, stood up calmly and pulled out a stack of sworn affidavits from residents who'd discovered trackers. Families with kids, elderly couples, a local teacher whose after-school activities were being monitored. These are not hypotheticals, she said. These are the people your clients betrayed. The judge looked over the paperwork, then said flatly, I see no scenario in which this case is not resolved through full compensatory damages. A week later, we got the number, $1.1 million to be paid jointly by the HOA's insurance and asset liquidation. The board was forced to resign en masse. Briarwood Glades lost its nonprofit status, and a temporary municipal oversight committee was installed to manage the transition until residents voted on full dissolution. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was structural. I visited the neighborhood a few days later. The atmosphere was different, lighter, cautious, but alive. Several residents thanked me quietly as I walked by. One woman even hugged Amber and said, "You saved this place. Even if it doesn't stay an HOA, it might finally be a community." Before I left, I dropped by the HOA office building. The sign was gone. The door was locked. And taped to the window, in shaky handwriting, was a note that read, "No surveillance past this point." Fitting. At GeoVigil, we issued an open letter to our customers explaining the breach, not on our end, but through theft. We reassured them, outlined new protections, and made one final offer, a free 5-year subscription to GeoVigil Safe for all verified residents of Briarwood Glades. Some things aren't about PR. Some things are just about fixing what others broke. 6 months later, I found myself standing behind a podium at the North American Cybersecurity Forum in Denver, Colorado. I never liked public speaking. Too many spotlights, too much pretense. But this one was different. The room was full of engineers, legal experts, civil rights advocates, and a few federal agents who looked like they knew what wiretapping smelled like from across the room. My talk was titled, "The Ghost in the Garage, When Surveillance Comes from Your Neighborhood." I didn't waste time with niceties. I showed the tracker. I showed the firmware. I walked them through the spoofing trap I'd laid in the forest preserve, then played a short body cam clip from the sting, just long enough to let the audience see Karen's face drop when she realized she'd walked into a honeypot. People laughed, nervously. Then I dropped the slide that said, "Lesson number 1, never track the spouse of the man who built your tracker." The applause was sharp, surprised. After the talk, I was mobbed by questions. Some were technical, encryption protocols, obfuscation routines, but most were about ethics. How to design systems that are hard to misuse, whether it's time for the U.S. to have a digital property bill of rights. A tech journalist asked if I felt vindicated. I said, "Vindication is temporary. Safeguards are permanent." That's where we're focused now. When I got home that weekend, something new had appeared at the gate to our property. A metal plaque, laser-etched in black steel, bolted to a sandstone column. It read, "This road is protected by GeoVigil, watching the watchers since 2025. Amber winked when I asked if she had anything to do with it. "Maybe," she said. Maybe a few neighbors pitched in. I stepped inside, dropped my bag, and checked the GeoVigil Safe admin portal. There were hundreds of new signups. People from all over the country, HOA neighborhoods, gated communities, rural homeowners. Even a fire department. Apparently, word had gotten out. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of rye and watched the sun slide behind the treetops. The stillness of the property was back. No paranoia, no digital shadows creeping through my codebase. Just air and silence and space to breathe. Amber joined me, barefoot, hair up, loose sweater falling off one shoulder. She leaned into me. "Think they'll try it again?" she asked. "Someone will," I said. "Always someone." She looked out across the field. "Then it's a good thing we're ready." I smiled. We weren't just ready. We were already 10 steps ahead. 3 weeks after the Denver conference, I received a letter from a law firm in Chicago. Not an email, mind you, an actual envelope. Heavy bond paper, embossed seal, zero nonsense. Inside was a cease and desist. At first, I thought it was a joke. The letter accused GeoVigil of unauthorized monitoring of residential HOA systems, citing our spoofed honeypot that had rerouted Karen's illegal tracker data to our cloud logs. but the signature at the bottom made my blood run cold. Jared C. Hallstrom, former general counsel of Meridian Insurance Group. That name had come up before. During discovery in Karen's criminal case, we'd found data batches marked MG priority and payment logs traced to Karen's encrypted wallet. Now he was trying to play defense by flipping the narrative. I called Ruth. "Looks like they're not done," I said. She read the letter and snorted. "He's trying to bait you. Don't bite." But I was already biting. Because that letter meant something important. They weren't just using Karen. They hired her. They paid for this breach. I dove back into our archives and called Baird, my forensics guy. We re-examined the device UID logs and packet signatures from the fake edge tracker Karen had installed. One stood out, an encrypted header that looked like machine-stitched telemetry tagging. Not her usual sloppy code. We reverse-engineered it. What we found was a firmware watermark, embedded deep, barely visible. It read, Veritas Echo 6.1, dev signed mid-X1. Veritas Echo wasn't Karen's tool. It was Meridian's in-house fleet software used to monitor insured vehicles. They'd reskinned our stolen firmware to use it in a commercial-grade surveillance product. They hadn't just bought data. They'd integrated the entire stolen codebase into a system they were actively selling. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local privacy violation. This was corporate espionage, national scale. We went straight to the FBI's cybercrime division. Within 72 hours, a task force was formed. It turned out our case wasn't isolated. Similar trackers had been found in HOA communities in Arizona, Florida, and Oregon. Same signature, same back-end relay. And guess who'd filed all the LLCs that bought those devices? A shell company based in Illinois. One registered agent, Jared Hallstrom. I was back in court, this time as a federal witness. The new case would take months, maybe years, but it didn't matter. The dominoes were falling again, and this time they were hitting bigger walls. In the meantime, GeoVigil launched Project Obsidian, a new initiative to watermark all embedded firmware with real-time self-authenticating tokens. Tamper once, it bricks. Tamper twice, it reports back. Not just passive defense, active countermeasures. At the next board meeting, our team voted unanimously to file for provisional patent protection. As I left the conference room, I passed a corkboard in the hallway. One of the interns had tacked up a copy of the original spoofed coordinates map, the one that sent Karen sprinting into the woods. Underneath it, someone had scribbled in black Sharpie, "The back door's always been ours." I didn't erase it. I left it exactly where it was.